The stagecoach came out of the desert like a moving cloud of dust, its wheels groaning as if the land itself resisted every mile it crossed. Horses snorted, leather creaked, and the midday sun hung low and unforgiving over the New Mexico territory. This was not a place that welcomed mistakes or second chances. The Apache man waited near the trading post, standing still while everything else seemed to move around him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and calm in a way that unsettled people. Settlers called him many things behind his back, but to his face they showed respect. He had earned it through years of fair trading, quiet strength, and a refusal to be provoked by cruelty. The arrangement had been simple. A letter, an agreement. A woman from back east seeking safety. A man seeking a household, companionship, and a bridge between two worlds. Mail-order marriages were not uncommon on the frontier. Loneliness was as widespread as dust, and survival often demanded practical decisions. When the coach finally stopped, townsfolk gathered, pretending they were only there to collect supplies or mail. Curiosity was a hunger no one admitted to. The door opened. A woman stepped down slowly, gripping the rail as if the ground itself might give way beneath her. She wore a faded blue dress that had once been neat but now showed the long journey west. Her bonnet sat crooked, shadowing a pale face marked by exhaustion. Then the whispers began. Her belly was unmistakable, rounded beneath the fabric. Too far along to hide, too heavy to deny. The Apache man noticed it at once. He did not look away. He did not frown. He simply took a breath, steady as the land beneath his feet. The woman saw his eyes follow the curve of her stomach, and her shoulders stiffened. Shame, fear, and resolve warred across her face. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times, knowing it would decide whether she lived in safety or returned to the mercy of a world that had already cast her out. "I didn't mean to deceive you," she said before anyone else could speak. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. "You deserve the truth before a single word of greeting." The crowd leaned closer. She explained quickly, as if speed might dull the sting. The father of the child was gone lost to gambling halls and promises that dissolved like smoke. Her town had turned on her. Work vanished. Doors closed. When the advertisement came offering marriage and protection in the West, she answered not with hope, but with desperation. "I understand if you refuse me," she finished softly. "I will leave. I only ask for safe passage out of town." Silence followed. Even the horses seemed to still. The Apache man studied her face, not her condition, not the whispers curling through the crowd, but her eyes. They were honest eyes. Tired, yes. Afraid, certainly. But not deceitful. He thought of his own people, how survival depended not on perfection, but on responsibility. How children were not burdens, but future fires yet to be lit. How honor was measured by what one did, when doing nothing would be easier. He stepped forward. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Some expected anger. Others waited for mockery. No one expected calm. "You came across half a continent carrying truth heavier than your bags," he said evenly. "That takes courage." The woman swallowed hard, tears threatening despite her resolve. "This land is harsh," he continued. "It takes more than pride to survive it. It takes care." Then he spoke the words that would follow them both for the rest of their lives. "You came seeking safety," he said. "That matters more than blood." A murmur spread, confusion, disapproval, disbelief. He offered her his arm, not as a claim, but as an invitation. "Come," he said. "We will talk. And we will decide our future with honesty." The woman hesitated only a moment before accepting. As she did, something shifted, not just between them, but in the watching crowd. A line had been crossed, one most people were too afraid to approach Dodd as they walked away from the stagecoach. The desert wind rose again, carrying dust across the road. But for the first time since she had begun her journey west, the woman felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not certainty, not love, but the fragile, powerful beginning of belonging. And on the frontier, that was everything. That night, the desert cooled quickly, as if the land itself exhaled after holding its breath all day. Stars pricked the sky in sharp brilliance, unsoftened by city smoke or comfort. A small fire crackled outside the Apache man's dwelling, its light dancing across the hard earth and the low wooden walls built to endure wind. Heat and judgment alike. The woman sat opposite him, hands folded tightly in her lap. She had eaten little, though he had offered food without question. Trust, she knew, was not something granted easily, especially not after the truth she carried. The fire popped, sending sparks upward. He waited. Among his people, silence was not uncomfortable. It was respectful. It allowed truth to find its own way out. At last she spoke. "My name is Margaret," she said quietly. But most people back home stopped using it once they knew. He nodded once, acknowledging her without comment. She told him everything then, not rushing, not sparing herself. She spoke of a river town along the Mississippi, of promises made by a man who loved cards more than consequences. When her condition became visible, sympathy turned to scorn. The church that once welcomed her closed its doors. The women she had sown beside crossed the street to avoid her. "There was no place left for me," she said, staring into the fire. "Only judgment." She described answering the advertisement with shaking hands. A stranger. An Apache. A land she had never seen. But the word safe home had burned brighter than fear. "I never expected kindness," she admitted. "Only shelter." He listened without interruption, his face unreadable in the firelight. When she finished, she braced herself again, shoulders tensing as if expecting the weight of rejection to finally fall. Instead, he stirred the fire and spoke calmly. "Among my people," he said, "a child is never blamed for how they arrive, only for how they are raised." She looked up, startled. He explained how families were built not only by blood, but by choice and responsibility. How children belong to the community, not just the parents who brought them into the world. A man's honor was measured not by avoiding shame, but by standing firm when shame was offered freely. Margaret felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she hadn't realized she had been carrying since the day she first noticed. Her belly began to swell. "But you owe me nothing," she said quickly. "I won't be a burden." He met her gaze steadily. "Survival is not a burden," he said. "It is a shared task." Outside, the night wind brushed past the dwelling, carrying distant sounds of the settlement laughter, arguments, the uneasy coexistence of worlds that rarely understood each other. Margaret admitted her fear of what tomorrow would bring. She had seen the looks earlier, the way people whispered, the way prejudice sharpened when difference appeared too close to home. "They will judge you for this," she said. "I don't want to cost you respect." He considered this carefully. Respect that vanishes when tested was never real. He replied, for the first time since she had stepped off the stagecoach. Margaret allowed herself to cry, not loud, not broken, but quietly, as someone who had held herself together for too long. He did not reach for her. He did not offer false comfort. He simply remained solid and present, letting the moment pass as it needed to. When the fire burned lower, he stood. "You will rest tonight," he said. "Tomorrow, we speak to the town, openly." Her eyes widened. "Together?" "Together," he confirmed as she lay down later, wrapped in a clean blanket. Margaret stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert night. For the first time in months, fear did not sit alone in her thoughts. There was still uncertainty, still danger, still judgment waiting with the sunrise, but there was also Something new, something she had not dared to hope for when she began her journey west. Someone willing to stand beside her in the open, on the frontier, where survival demanded courage every day. That choice mattered more than any promise written on paper. The morning sun rose over the frontier settlement with harsh light, exposing every corner, every secret, every whisper that had grown like weeds overnight. Word of the mail-order bride's arrival had spread faster than the wind whipping across the mesas. By the time Margaret and the Apache man stepped out to face the day, the streets were lined with curious, disapproving, and outright hostile faces. Settlers stopped in mid-step to stare. Mothers tugged their children behind them. Men leaned on fence posts, muttering. Some voices, sharp and cruel, carried across the wooden walkways. Another man's child, and he's going to raise it? Ridiculous! She should be sent back where she came from. Even among the Apache man's own people, there was unease. Tradition dictated careful consideration in marriage arrangements, and outsiders, especially a woman carrying another man's child, stirred murmurs of doubt. Could he be trusted to uphold the tribe's honor while choosing an unconventional path? Could he protect both his people's reputation and the child's well-being? Margaret felt every gaze as a physical weight pressing on her shoulders. She had anticipated rejection, but the intensity of judgment shocked her. Every step toward the trading post made her feel smaller, as though the ground itself wished to swallow her. She glanced at the Apache man. He walked steadily, unshaken by the stares, the whispers, or the pointed fingers. His presence was like a wall of rock, immovable, unwavering. Yet it wasn't his stature that held her attention. It was the quiet decision in his eyes. He would not waver, no matter the disapproval. A group of settlers blocked their path, led by a man with a face red from sun and scorn. "You can't just take a woman with a child like that," he barked. "She's a burden, and you're asking for trouble." The Apache man stopped, studied the man's face, and spoke with deliberate calm. "A child is not a burden, and trouble is created by those who refuse to understand responsibility." Gasps spread along the crowd. His words were measured, but carried the weight of authority and conviction. The man sputtered, searching for a retort, but found only the unwavering stare of someone who had faced far worse than gossip. Margaret's chest tightened. She had expected shame, perhaps even anger, but she had not anticipated the pride swelling within her as she saw how he defended her, not with fists, but with principles. The settlers murmured, unsure how to respond. Some lowered their heads in shame. Others continued whispering, plotting, judging, but for the first time, their voices lacked the sharp edge of certainty. Later that day, the Apache man and Margaret walked through the settlement, explaining their intentions. "This child will be raised with care," he said. "We will teach him respect, courage, and the strength to face life honestly." Margaret added her own words, softly but firmly, "And I will do my part. This child is mine to love, as much as I am yours to protect." A few skeptics shifted uncomfortably. Some began to nod, tentative approval replacing the initial derision. Others still shook their heads, but even they could not deny the determination and love evident in the pair's united front. As the day drew to a close, Margaret and the Apache man returned to the quiet of his dwelling. The sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows that mirrored the doubts and fears of the day, but also the beginnings of hope. Margaret whispered, "Do you think they'll ever accept us?" He paused, looking out across the settlement bathed in the golden glow of sunset. "Acceptance," he said, "comes slowly. But courage and honesty always find a way to shine through the darkness." For the first time, Margaret believed that survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about standing tall, facing judgment, and choosing love over fear. And in that moment, she realized that whatever the world thought, She and the Apache man were already building a family, one that no gossip or prejudice could undo. That night, as the desert sky darkened and stars appeared like pinpricks of promise, Margaret felt a fragile but unwavering sense of belonging. The journey west had begun as an escape, but now it was becoming something far greater, a chance at a new life founded on trust, courage, and the quiet power of love. The weeks that followed tested both Margaret and the Apache man in ways neither could have imagined. Life on the frontier was never easy, but now every sunrise carried the weight of scrutiny, the threat of violence, and the constant pressure of surviving in a world that judged anyone who dared to be different. At first, Margaret tried to avoid the settlers' eyes, keeping close to the Apache man as they went about daily chores. She fetched water, gathered firewood, and learned to cook with the simple ingredients the land provided. Every action was shadowed by whispers, pointed fingers, and sometimes outright ridicule. Yet each time she faltered, he stood beside her, not with words of scolding, but with quiet reassurance that she was not alone. Then the threats escalated. One morning, a pair of men from a nearby settlement rode up, guns slung carelessly over their shoulders, daring him to challenge their judgment. "We hear you're raising another man's child," one sneered. "That's not how things are done round here. Step aside before trouble finds you." The Apache man met them calmly. He did not draw his weapon, did not yell, did not retreat. Instead, he spoke with deliberate calm, each word measured like the beat of a drum. "The child is innocent. I am responsible. That is the law I live by. If you wish to test me, know that you test your own honor first." The men hesitated, taken aback by the steady certainty in his tone. After a tense moment, they rode off, grumbling, unable to provoke the reaction they had expected. Margaret felt a thrill of relief and admiration, but also a deeper understanding of what it meant to be truly brave, not to fight recklessly, but to stand firm when injustice loomed. That evening, as they repaired the roof of the dwelling together, Margaret watched him move with a practiced ease. His hands, strong and sure, worked over the worn wood with the care of someone who valued preservation over destruction. He paused, noticing her gaze. "You worry too much," he said softly. "Fear is natural, but it must not guide your actions." She nodded, though the anxiety in her chest remained. "It's not easy," she admitted. "They judge us for every choice." He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Then we choose anyway. Family is built from courage, not approval." As the weeks turned into months, Margaret learned more than just survival. She learned patience, a deep respect for the land, and the traditions that shaped the Apache way of life. She learned how decisions were weighed not only for the individual but for the community, and how strength could be measured in quiet acts of care rather than loud declarations of power. Through it all, the bond between her and the Apache man grew. Not yet love in the fiery sense of passion, but something steadier, trust, respect, and an understanding that they were building a foundation that could withstand storms, both literal and metaphorical. One night, as they sat by the fire, she touched her belly, feeling the life within her. "Do you think I can do this?" she asked softly. He looked at her, eyes steady and full of calm certainty. "You are already doing it," he said. "You carry life. You face the world honestly. You learn. You endure. That is enough. That is everything." In that moment, Margaret understood the lesson the frontier had been teaching her all along. Survival was not about isolation, nor about hiding from judgment. It was about choosing family over fear, love over prejudice, and courage over despair. By the time the first signs of spring appeared, green shoots pushing through the dust, flowers daring to bloom amidst rocks, the settlement began to take notice. People saw the Apache man protect her not with violence but with integrity. They saw her grow stronger each day. And slowly, the murmurs of doubt softened, replaced by curiosity and, in some cases, admiration. Margaret no longer felt the same crushing fear that had accompanied her journey west. She understood that family was not merely given by circumstance, it was chosen, nurtured, and defended. And in that choice, she discovered a strength she had never known she possessed. A strength mirrored in the man who had promised to raise her child as his own. The frontier remained harsh and unyielding. But now, at least, she faced it not alone, but with someone who had shown her the quiet power of courage, trust, and unwavering love. The months passed, and with them came the first signs that the life Margaret carried would soon arrive. The desert, once harsh and unforgiving, seemed to hold its breath in anticipation, as if the land itself recognized the gravity of what was about to occur. Every morning brought the sun blazing over the mesas, but also a quiet hope, the kind that seeps into the bones and refuses to be shaken. Margaret's belly had grown, and with it, her awareness of the life within. Nights were often restless, filled with dreams of a tiny hand grasping for comfort and a father who had yet to be claimed. Yet when she looked at the Apache man, standing watch as he tended the fire or repaired tools, she felt a steady reassurance that no danger could undo the commitment he had made. One evening, a storm rolled in from the west. Dark clouds gathered, rumbling across the horizon, and the first sharp streaks of lightning split the sky. Rain began to fall, heavy and relentless, turning the dirt roads to mud. The wind howled like a warning, shaking the simple wooden walls of their dwelling. The labor came suddenly and without warning. Margaret's cries cut through the storm as the contractions began, fierce and demanding. Fear gripped her not of the birth itself, but of the world outside, the judgment and the dangers that lurked even as she lay in pain. The Apache man moved with practiced calm, gathering blankets, warming water, and calling upon the knowledge of his people. His hands, which had so often repaired fences and carried firewood, now offered steady support, guiding, reassuring, and protecting. Margaret's breaths were ragged, but she felt the presence of someone who would not falter. Every doubt, every whispered insult from the past seemed to fade as he murmured words of encouragement in a language she could not fully understand but felt in the marrow of her bones. A settler midwife, called by a neighbor who had come to respect the Apache man's judgment, arrived just in time. The two of them worked together, blending indigenous and settler knowledge, each learning from the other. Margaret felt the strength of a community forming around her, even amid the storm. Finally, with one last cry, the child emerged. Margaret gasped, exhausted and overwhelmed, as the newborn's wails mingled with the sound of the rain. The Apache man reached first, cradling the tiny life against his chest. His eyes, steady and proud, met Margaret's. "This is your strength," he said softly. As though the infant carried the promise of hope itself, he named the child with a word that carried meaning in his language renewal: unity and life forged through struggle. Margaret repeated it, feeling the weight and beauty of belonging settle in her heart. In that moment, the child was more than a baby. It was the living symbol of courage, honesty, and the choices that had led them all to this day. Outside, the storm began to pass. Rain softened to a gentle drizzle, lightning faded, and the wind whispered through the trees with a gentleness that matched the calm settling over the dwelling. The desert, once indifferent, seemed to breathe with relief. Margaret rested, the newborn tucked against her, while the Apache man sat close, sharing stories of the land and his people in low, steady tones. She listened captivated, understanding in a new way the strength and wisdom that had guided him through every challenge. Through the long night, they spoke quietly about the future, how they would raise this child with love, knowledge, and courage. How they would teach him both the ways of the Apache and the ways of the settlers, so he could navigate the world with wisdom, respect, and resilience. For the first time since her journey began, Margaret allowed herself to believe not just in survival, but in thriving. She understood that love could be chosen, nurtured, and protected, and that the bonds of family were not determined by circumstance alone, but by courage and care. By morning, the storm had passed entirely. The sun rose over the desert, warming the earth, the dwelling, and the hearts within. Margaret looked at the Apache man, then at the child cradled between them, and whispered, "We did it." He smiled, eyes soft but resolute. "We chose life," he said, "and now we raise it together." In that moment, the future no longer felt uncertain. The child had arrived, and with him came the promise of a family bound by trust, courage, and love, ready to face whatever the frontier might bring. The months after the child's birth passed with a rhythm that was both gentle and demanding, shaped by the frontier's harsh beauty. Margaret learned quickly, guided by instinct and the steady presence of the Apache man at her side. The settlement, once skeptical, began to take note not out of curiosity, but respect. The child, laughing and learning with the seasons, was a living testament to courage, honesty, and love. Every day brought challenges. The desert was unforgiving, and survival required constant work tending the small plot of crops, gathering firewood, and keeping the dwelling safe from harsh weather. Yet each task, no matter how ordinary, was now infused with purpose. Margaret carried the lessons of the past with her, the strength she had found in facing judgment, the patience she had learned under guidance, and the understanding that family was forged through choice and care, not circumstance alone. The Apache man continued to teach them both. He instructed Margaret on ways to read the land, to recognize edible plants, track water sources, and predict weather changes. He told stories of his people's history and traditions, explaining the importance of balance, respect, and responsibility. Margaret shared her own knowledge, teaching the child to read the few letters she had learned, to count coins, and to understand words that opened doors beyond the frontier. Together, they created a small, vibrant world, a blend of cultures, skills, and love. Neighbors began to accept them too. Some approached with cautious curiosity, asking questions about the child, about Margaret, about the life they had chosen together. Slowly, prejudice softened as respect grew. People saw that the Apache man had kept his word, that Margaret had contributed fully, and that the child was raised with kindness, courage, and a deep sense of belonging. The lessons of tolerance and cooperation spread quietly through the settlement, teaching that honor and character mattered more than origin or circumstance. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mesas, painting the sky in streaks of gold and rose, Margaret sat on the porch, the child asleep in her arms. The Apache man joined her, leaning against the post, his eyes on the horizon. They spoke little, for words were unnecessary. They had lived the lessons that mattered: commitment, courage, and love. He turned to her, his voice steady. "You have grown stronger than you realize," he said. "And so has our child. You faced fear, judgment, and hardship, and you chose family over all of it. That is the true measure of strength." Margaret smiled softly. "We both did, and together we'll keep choosing." The child stirred, blinking at the fading sunlight, and reached for his father. The Apache man scooped him up effortlessly, holding him close. The simple gesture spoke of belonging, protection, and the bonds that could not be broken by fear or prejudice. As night settled over the desert, the family sat together, the stars glittering overhead. The quiet of the frontier, once intimidating and isolating, now felt like a cradle of safety, love, and possibility. Margaret realized that life had given her more than she could have hoped. Not just shelter, not just survival, but a family chosen with intention and nurtured with courage. In the years that followed, the settlement witnessed more stories like theirs, small acts of understanding, neighbors lending help, and cultural bridges forming where once there had been suspicion. The child grew strong, wise, and compassionate, raised by parents who had learned that family was not defined by birth alone, but by responsibility, love, and the courage to stand together against the world. On a quiet morning, Margaret whispered to her child, "Remember, love is not inherited. It is chosen, and every day you choose to give it." The Apache man nodded beside her, knowing that the lessons they had lived would continue to ripple outward, shaping hearts and minds for generations. And so, in a harsh and beautiful land, amidst storms and sun, the mail-order bride, the Apache man, and their child built a life that endured, one earned by courage, nurtured by love, and sealed with the unshakable bond of family. Their story became a testament to the truth that belonging is never given. It is created, chosen, and cherished. The frontier remained wild and unpredictable, but within their home they had found a future that was safe, happy, and full of hope, a life that no judgment could undo.